Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Learn to Play Shogi. In this episode I'm going to introduce the final two pieces that we haven't talked about so far, and that will complete all the pieces in the game. And then I will talk about the rules for starting and ending a game, and that will actually complete everything you need to know to play a game of Shogi. But I do plan one more episode after that in part 5. I want to talk about opening principles, maybe some sample openings, and strategy, and go over a game perhaps. So that will complete the series. But anyway, let's get back and finish with the pieces and the rules. So a little bit of a recap here. This is the board as we left it and in episode 3. These are all the pieces we've introduced. The pawn, if you want to recognize it, you should focus on the character on top. These, a strong horizontal line, two vertical lines, and the diagonal slash are the main features of that kanji. And when you see a kanji score written in a newspaper, that's the character that's used. And also, if you play in an online server, they often have a set that just has the single character, which will be the character on top. So that's what you should focus on in recognizing the pawn. Also, the pawn is the smallest piece. We have the king, which is the largest piece. I think it's just as large as the heavy pieces I'm about to introduce in this episode. Anyway, the kanji on top is very recognizable with the vertical stroke and 3 lines going across. And of course, there's the slight difference I mentioned, where this is actually the king general and this is the jewel general. That there's a little stroke on the side of that kanji, and it changes the meaning from king to jewel. But they both act like kings. That's how they move. And next to the kings, we have the gold general. The gold is easily recognizable by that big hat across the top, and then something that looks a little bit like a house underneath it. Next to the gold, we have the silver general. And the silver general, it's getting a little bit harder to recognize. We started with the easy one. The king and the gold are the most recognizable. This has a little peak to the side, and if you look at the kanji on top, which is once again the character you should focus on to recognize, you see it's kind of split into 2 parts, and the left part is actually the kanji for gold, just shrunk a little bit and compressed to the side. And then there's another character which I guess on the right side sort of modifies gold to indicate it's another precious metal. That's silver. Then we have the knight. The knight is, it has the kanji for horse on bottom, so that you will see it if you have one of these sets. It's pretty easy to recognize, but if you have a set that only has the single character on top, you actually need to learn to recognize the kanji, the top kanji there, which is, it's a type of tree. And again, this is a kanji that's composed of 2 separate parts. The part on the left is a kanji radical that means tree. It's got a vertical stroke, a horizontal stroke, and then 2 lines that come down at an angle. And then next to that is another kanji, or part of the kanji, that has a vertical stroke and then a series of horizontal lines, 4 horizontal lines. So that's pretty distinctive once you learn to recognize it as the knight. And then lastly, in the corner, we have the lance, once again composed of 2 parts. This is an incense chariot. And the character on top, you can imagine this looking like a pot of incense, and this is the handle that somebody might hold it by and swing the incense from, and then the pot at the bottom is the incense holder. So the next piece that I want to introduce is the bishop, and the bishop looks like this. And this kanji written on the bishop literally means angle goer. So that top kanji is angle, and the bottom kanji means going or traveling. So yes, it travels at angles. So very descriptive name, not one of these colorful names like kasha horse or incense chariot. So a very practical kind of name, and it acts exactly like the bishop in chess. It can go forwards and backwards, and it can move as many spaces as it likes until it runs into something. So that being the case, it's actually one of the heavy pieces. It's one of the strongest pieces in Shogi, and it gets even stronger when it promotes. but we will get to that in a second. Let's first put it here where it goes. I want to complete the setup here so you can see what the whole thing looks like. And then the other piece I want to introduce is the Rook. And this is a flying chariot, literally. If you notice, we'll compare this to the lance. The lance was incense chariot. You can see that the second character in both of these two kanji is the same. And the distinctive character is the character on top, which means flying. I don't know if that kanji is supposed to represent a bird. To me, it kind of looks like maybe a bunch of birds taking off from a tree or a post. Imagine a lamppost or a telephone post and a bunch of birds all flying away from it at once with all those little brushed lines coming out to the side. But however you can learn to recognize it, think of flying. And of course, it's a flying chariot because it can go up and down and side to side. And once again, it behaves exactly like the Rook in chess. It can go as many spaces as it likes, and in either direction. It can go forwards and backwards, and it only stops when it runs into something. And then and that goes here on the right side. So the on the left we have the bishop. It's on sits right above the knight, and on the right we have the Rook, and it sits right above the knight on that side. And your opponent does the same thing. His bishop goes here on his left, and his Rook goes here on his right. And so notice that the bishops are on the same diagonal. So in a game of shogi, it's very common. The most common first moves in a game of shogi are either this pawn forward to open up a diagonal for the bishop, or this pawn forward with the idea of giving more space for the Rook. So in the early game, it's the Rooks and the bishops that you have to take the most care with. In a way, you want to make sure they get active because they are the strongest pieces. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about recognition. One problem I ran into was I would sometimes confuse the bishop with the silver. Now the bishop is slightly larger. The bishop is just as large as a king. So if we talk about heavy pieces, we'll put the king up here, and we have the bishop and the Rook on either side. These are the three largest pieces that you'll find on the shogi board, and it looks to me like they're the same size. So anyway, these are the heavy pieces. So let's put them back for a second. And now the point I was going to get to, if you compare the bishop to the silver general, at first, because I was focusing on this little peak here of the part of the kanji that refers to gold, I was comparing the gold to the silver, and I was saying, well, the gold has this big hat, and then the silver has a little hat that's off to the side. But when I was looking at the top of the kanji for the bishop, it also has something that looks kind of like a little hat off to the side. So you need to distinguish between this character and this character, the two characters that are on top. Now they're pretty easy to distinguish once you've recognized their different characters. This is actually, it has the gold radical on one side and a different character. It has the gold radical on the left side and a different set of strokes on the right side. Whereas the kanji for bishop, the kanji that means angle, it's just all one unified piece. It doesn't have a left half and a right half. It's just that the top is actually composed of two strokes that looks a little bit like an angle. So it was a little bit confusing to me. But if you focus on those two, you can see they're actually quite different and distinct kanji. So let's put the bishop back. Let's put the silver back. And yeah, and I mentioned these two have the same character on bottom. By the way, I was giving the names in Japanese. So this is called Hisha, flying chariot, and this was called Kyosha, the incense chariot. And the bishop, it has a unique name. It's Kaku-gyo, Kaku for short, and it just means angle goer, like I was saying. And in the case of the rook, it was he-sha. He was flying, and sha was chariot. Okay, so that's the pieces. And now let's talk about how they promote. All of the minor pieces are promoted to gold when you promoted them. But that would be a demotion for these pieces. So these pieces actually promote to stronger pieces. And the way they work is that when they promote, they get the moves of the king as well as the moves that they had originally. So the bishop, when it promotes to this character, which is dragon horse. That's the translation of that kanji. And the dragon horse has all the moves of the bishop. It can go at an angle in any direction. Plus it has the moves of the king, so it can move one square in any direction. So it's a very powerful piece because it can do a fork against some piece that's close at hand anywhere in any of those neighboring squares. And it can fork that against some piece that's far away along one of the angles. And similarly for the rook, when the rook promotes, it promotes to a piece called the Dragon King. And these are cursive kanji, by the way. So this character for king, you can see it's kind of like a scribbled version of the kanji for king. Anyway, it moves like a rook, straight lines in any direction, plus it has all the moves of a king, so it can move to any of those neighboring squares. And once again, that makes it quite powerful. It makes it more maneuverable, and it has that forking ability that I mentioned. So let's look at the promoted sides. Now notice that these two characters both have the word dragon in their first position. So this is Dragon King, this is Dragon Horse. To distinguish between these two pieces, you don't call them both dragons. You call the rook, the promoted rook, you call that a dragon, and the promoted bishop, you call that a horse. So for every other piece, when the name is shortened, when it's abbreviated, it's shortened to the kanji on top. So this would just be called a dragon. But if we called this one a dragon, it would be confused. It would have the same name as the rook. So this one is called a horse. And when you see the single kanji when you see it reduced to a single character, they use the kanji that's on bottom, the horse kanji. And once again, I want to point out this is actually a script version of this character. This is what the kanji for horse looks like normally, and this is kind of a script version. So it's a scribbled version of the kanji for horse, but you can see that characteristic loop, so it actually is pretty distinctive. And in most sets, in many sets, the back sides, the promoted sides, are printed in red. And you can also get sets where they just have the single character rather than the double character. Anyway, so that is all the pieces. Let's put the bishop back, put the rook back, and talk about how the game starts. So for this exercise, I'm going to take the senior position here. I'm going to take the king, and I'm going to give the jewel general. I'm going to take the king general, and I'm going to give the jewel general to my opponent. So that means I'm the senior player. And the way I start a game is I take the 5 pawns that are in front, and I shake them up, and I drop them on the board. And then you count how many of them are right side up and how many of them are promoted side up. So if there's a majority of pawns that have been promoted, if there's a majority of pawns that are not promoted, then I get to go first. So in this case, I would be black. Let's see if I can do that. I wondered if that was a fair shake. Okay, and there's an example. In this case, I would be white, and my opponent would be black, because there's a majority of promoted pieces there. Okay, anyway, then you set these back. And remember, black is the side that goes first. So if we go by the first shake that I did, I had a majority of pawns that were unpromoted, so I get to go first. So that's starting the game. Ending the game. The most common way to end a game is by resignation. And the second most common way of ending the game is by illegal move. So checkmate does not actually end the game. When your opponent places you in checkmate, you're given the opportunity to resign, and that's the proper thing to do. You say, I resign. And this is played out in the online game server that I was using. It had me confused the first time I ran into this because I was checkmated, but my clock was still running like it was expecting me to make a move. But what it was waiting for was it was waiting for me to resign. And of course, any move you make at that point would be an illegal move. So if you didn't notice you were in checkmate and you made a move, then the game would end at that point because the illegal move ends the game and you lose. So it's also considered rude to make an illegal move when you're in checkmate. I lost a couple of games by illegal move, and every time you do that, it puts up a little message saying it's not considered polite to make an illegal move to get out of having to resign. So when you're checkmated, be a good sport and resign. That's the protocol. And so that's usually the way games end. There's very few games that end in a draw, but you can have a game that ends in a draw. And one draw rule is the rule of draw by repetition. So if the same position on the board occurs 4 times, and that includes not just on the board, but also the same position, the same pieces on the piece stands, and the same side to move. That's the definition of the same position. Then if that occurs 4 times in a game, then on the 4th time you can claim a draw by repetition. And that is there is one exception to that. And let me see if I can set up a case here. Let's clean out the boards a little bit. Here's an example of the point I wanted to illustrate. So you can see that white is in big trouble. His king is over here, isolated, doesn't have any good supporting forces around, and I've got some pawns coming in, a silver and a knight. So looks like something bad is going to happen. He just dropped his knight here to attack my silver and the pawn, trying to eliminate some of the force. But it's my turn to move now, and I can place my silver here, and that's a check. So there's no piece that can take this other than the king. The king is attacking that square, but this is defended by a pawn, so the king can't take it. And no other piece that white has is attacking that square. So the king has to run away. That's the only other option. Can't go forward because the pawn is controlling that square. So it has to go backwards. And now I can take the silver and I can move forward to this square. And that, once again, places the king in check. And notice the silver is defended by the knight there. So the king can't go to the side. The silver controls all those 3 squares in front. So it has to go back to this side. I meant it can't go in front of the silver. And now black could repeat here. He could just move the bishop back. The bishop can go backwards along a diagonal like that and deliver a check. And you can see that black could do that as many times as he liked. However, and it would seem like he could create a draw that way by perpetual check. But in fact, that would be an illegal move. It is not allowed in Shogi to give this kind of draw by perpetual check. So what's the difference between this draw and the draw by 4-time repetition? You can create a 4-time repetition this way, but your opponent never had a choice to avoid the repetition. And so that's what makes it illegal. Your opponent always has to have a choice. In any draw situation, your opponent always has to have the choice of declining the draw and playing on, whereas here he wouldn't have that choice. So by forcing that on him, you're actually the one who made the illegal move by creating that 4-time repetition by force. And so black would lose the game if he tried to do that. So you could think of that as an anti-draw rule that Shogi has. So it's pretty limited, the situations in which you can get a draw. And in general, most games end in some kind of mating attack, or you just win overwhelming amounts of material and your opponent resigns before he gets mated. But that's how most games end. But there is one final type of one final way that you can end the game, and that's called impasse. So I don't have a good way to illustrate this right now. I'll just say what the rule is. Imagine your king has marched over here, probably accompanied by a general or two. Let's clear out some of the pawns so I don't create any illegal situations. And you know, maybe these pieces have been taken, and so the king is over here in the enemy camp, probably surrounded by some of his generals that he brought with him. Let's get a silver general, and notice that the pieces that come with him will get promoted, and maybe has a pawn behind him. Anyway, this is a king that has invaded the enemy camp, and this is actually hard to attack because as he comes into the enemy camp, his pieces promote, and the way shogi pieces are designed, they attack mostly in the forward direction. So if you can imagine trying to maneuver a piece around like a silver or gold to attack that king is very difficult. You would have to come in at an angle like this, find some square that's not covered and try and come in that way, but that square is covered by the rook, or by the gold there. So it's very difficult to attack a king like that. And suppose your opponent has done the same thing. He's marched his king all the way in. Let's see, the lance. Let's take that off of there. That would not be a legal piece to have there. Let's say he's got he might have a promoted piece with him, like a promoted lance and a promoted silver. Might have a pawn or two, maybe another promoted pawn. So anyway, he's got the whole retinue of his own pieces around him. And once again, this piece is very difficult to attack. So if this has happened, if both kings have entered the enemy camp, then you can call an impasse. And this is something that has to be done by agreement. So both sides have to agree that they will call it an impasse. And then the game is settled this way. It's settled by a point count. You take all the pieces that you have in hand and on the board that are yours, and you get 1 point for every pawn. You get 1 point for every minor piece, so the gold, silver generals, the lances, and the knights. And you get 5 points for each rook and each bishop, and it doesn't matter if they're promoted or not. So every piece has a value, either 1 point or 5 points, except the king. The king doesn't count, so that's 0. But 1 point for each pawn, 1 point for each minor piece, and 5 points for each rook and bishop. You total that up, and if one side has less than 24 points, then that side loses. But if both sides have more than or equal to 24 points, then the game is declared a draw. So that's a pretty even result. If you think about the starting position, you have the 4 minor pieces here, the 4 minor pieces here. So that would be 8. Plus you have the 9 pawns, so that would be 17. Plus you have a rook and a bishop, so that would be 27. So you start with 27 points. And if you still have 24 points at this point in the game, at this stage of the game, then you've only lost 3 pawns, basically. You can't have lost, or maybe a minor piece and a pawn or 2, but you can't have lost a major piece. So losing 1 major piece is enough to shift the balance in that point count. So that's it for all the rules. And notice that it's almost all games will end in a checkmate or by resignation, because well, first of all, there were those anti-draw rules, so you can't force a draw by repetition. You can only do but through perpetual check. I mean, you can only do a draw by repetition if both sides agree to it. And secondly, as you progress through the game, because you have the ability to drop pieces back that you've captured, the total amount of force on the board is staying the same about, and actually increases, because as you play through the game, pieces get promoted, and as long as they aren't captured, they retain their promoted value. So So the force increases through the course of the game, and you gradually break down your opponent's defenses and penetrate his camp. And usually that is enough to turn the tide. This impasse is a pretty unusual situation to occur. But anyway, let's wrap this part of it up. To summarize, there's 4 ways that you can end a game. The most common one is resignation, and that includes checkmate, because when you're placed in checkmate, you're expected to resign. You should probably even resign as soon as you can see the checkmate is inevitable. The second way to lose is through an illegal move, which is pretty rare at the professional level, but it happens pretty commonly in amateur games. The most common illegal move, I think, is the illegal pawn drop. Let's see, I've actually created a situation over here where there was an illegal pawn. You can't have doubled pawns. So if I were to drop a pawn here, that would be an illegal move. I should be picking it up from my own piece stand. Yeah, if I were to take a pawn and drop it here, that's an illegal move, and I would lose the game immediately. That's happened to me a couple of times already playing. So that's the biggest one to watch out for. Other illegal moves you'll be pretty much on the lookout for, like moving your king into check or that kind of thing, failing to move your king out of check. Those are the typical illegal moves. And then the special illegal move of forcing a repetition through perpetual check. So resignation, illegal move, then repetition leading to a draw, 4 times repetition, and then the 4th way of ending a game is through impasse, and the impasse can result in either a win if one side doesn't have the required 24 points, or that could be a draw. So let's go back and just look at the pieces one last time. We have the pawns, the foot soldiers of the game, Fu Hyo or To, and Fu, the short name. The character on top is the one you should focus on. We have the kings. The kings are Osho and Gyokusho, meaning king general and jewel general. And once again, focus on the character on top. Next to the king, we have the gold general. It's you get 1 on each side of the king, so a total of 2. That reads gold general, but the character on top, gold, is the one to focus on. Next to the gold generals, we have the silver generals. And these are the pieces that don't promote. If you look at the back sides of the gold or the king, you will see it's just empty. But everything else can promote. So the silver general promotes to a gold. We can recognize the silver general by the gold icon that's off to the side, the gold kanji radical. That's part of the kanji character that's in the top position there, the first character in the name. So that's Ginsho is silver and Kinsho is gold. And then the other minor pieces, we have the knights. And the knights, you want to recognize the character on top. There's the kanji radical for tree on this side, and that means kasha. There's another sort of tree-like set of strokes to the right of the kanji for radical for tree, and it promotes to a gold, just like a silver promotes to a gold. And then we have the lance. The lance, the knight is kema, the lance is kyosha, and the lance also promotes to a gold. And you want to recognize the lance by the character on top, which means incense. That means incense chariot. And then lastly, we have the heavy pieces, and the major pieces in shogi. The angle goer, the bishop, is kakugyo, and its promoted side is a dragon horse, or just horse for short. The only character that uses the only piece that uses the second character for an abbreviation rather than the first character. And then we have the rook. The rook is hisha, flying chariot, and its promoted side is a dragon king, which is dragon for short. So dragon, horse, rook, bishop, lance, promoted lance, knight, promoted knight, silver, promoted silver, gold, king, king, pawn, and promoted pawn. And that's the full set of characters, and that is all the rules. Next, I wanted to show you a little bit about the website 81 Dojo, and that'll wrap this video up. 81 Dojo is a place where you can go to play some shogi, or just to watch some shogi being played, and just see if you can figure out what's going on. Good practice to recognize the pieces and guess the moves, or try and understand the moves. So it's an international site. It's in Japanese and English. If you find yourself on a page that's all Japanese like this, there will usually be a button somewhere that says English, and you can click on that and you'll get to the English language version. So the name is now English, and the instructions down here are English. Occasionally you'll see text that's Japanese here and there, but for the most part it'll be English. So yeah, here's some example. There's some Japanese text there. Anyway, to create an account, you go to Web System, but you don't have to create an account. You can play as guest. I'll show you that in a minute, but creating an account is free, and then they will track your rating after you do that. Anyway, you go back to this page, and to log in, you click on this big button here that says Entrance. Anywhere on that big button will be fine, and then it lets you log in. And I already have created a login for myself, but let's just log in as guest so you can see that that is easy and simple. And this is what the next stage is like. This is shows all the games that are going on the server over here. On the left here is all the players, and then in the middle this is information. You'll see lines of information coming out here. So I'm a guest and I don't have a rating. All the guests are unrated. And then above that we have rated players starting at 11Q, and it goes from 11Q down to 1Q, and then it goes from 1Q to 1 Dan, and then it goes from 1 Dan up to 7 Dan currently on the server. So that's a pretty large range of playing ability, and that was in ascending order. That was getting stronger as you would go towards the top. To start with, you will the first time you create an account, you'll get an assigned rating of 1040. So you'll have a 9Q, or yeah, that's 9Q. 1040 is in the 9Q range. And after after I played some games, I lost, and I dropped down to 10Q. So now I'm in this range here. I may hit 11Q yet. And I've seen ratings lower than this. This is just currently who's on the server. But you can see there's still quite a few players in the lower ranges. And down here is a list of players that are waiting for a game. And you can double click. If it's a practice game, you can play as a guest. So you could double click on that and challenge that player to a game, and then they have the option of accepting you or not. And if you have a rating, then you can play any of these rated games. If you're a registered user, even before you have a rating, you can play any of these rated games, because you need to be able to play a rated game to get a rating. So that's how you get a game. Let's show what they look like. Let's see. Yeah, there's a new game that started here, so maybe we'll get a game near the beginning. Notice that the characters, the pieces they're using, have only a single character on them. So these are the pawns. Like I said, that's the first character of the 2-character name. The kings are in the middle. The gold generals are next to the king. Okay, the king has started running to safety, it looks like. We have the silver generals. They're starting to come out. We have the rook and the bishop. And over here we have the lance. Remember, the lance is the incense chariot. And the knight. Remember, the knight is the kasha horse. So this symbol here, it looks like a tree. And it is. The kasha is a kind of cinnamon tree. So the kasha horse is the knight. So that's what the characters, the unpromoted characters, look like. And then let's go back to a game that has ended. Maybe this game. They keep games that have ended up for a while. And on the reverse side of the character, when it's promoted, you'll see that it has a red colored piece here. And so this is a promoted bishop. That's the horse there. Let's back up and see if they have any other pieces. Oh yeah, here's a promoted silver. So that was a silver. Where did that come from? Yeah, okay, the silver was here, and it moved diagonally to the next square and promoted to a gold. So that's an example of moving a piece and getting a promotion. So anyway, that's all I have to show you here. It's just a handy site you can go to and watch people play some games and practice your skills at recognizing the pieces, understanding what's going on. And when you feel comfortable, you can challenge someone to a game. In my next video, that'll be the final one in this Learn to Play Shogi series. I'll talk about the openings, maybe a little bit about strategy, not much because I don't know very much, and maybe go through a sample game so you can look forward to that. And that should finish off this Learn to Play Shogi series. And I will see you then. Bye.